The body of Ruby McKinnon lay motionless in the blood behind the Maple Spoon Diner in Pine Grove, Vermont. The 18-year-old basketball star had been stabbed multiple times by Liam Foster, her former boyfriend of the same age. The violent attack sent shockwaves through the quiet town of 3,500, where high school basketball games were typically the most dramatic events of the week. Hours earlier, Ruby had been laughing with her best friend Macy Chen over hot chocolate, discussing their upcoming freshman year at Duke University. Now she was being rushed to Burlington Memorial Hospital, her mother, Officer Diana McKinnon, following the ambulance with sirens blaring, while Liam Foster was taken into custody with self-inflicted wounds to his neck. The story of Ruby McKinnon and Liam Foster began long before that bloody afternoon. If you're enjoying our content, quickly hit subscribe to join our community and never miss a moment. Let's dive in. Ruby McKinnon was Pine Grove High School's golden girl. At 18, she stood 5'9" with athletic grace and an easy smile that drew people in. As captain of the girls' basketball team, she led them to 3 consecutive state championships. Her average of 28 points per game had earned her a full scholarship to Duke University, a feat celebrated throughout the small Vermont town. But basketball wasn't Ruby's only passion. Every Saturday morning, she volunteered at the local animal shelter, where her gentle touch could calm even the most frightened strays. At home, she helped raise her 12-year-old sister Emma, while their mother, Officer Diana McKinnon, worked long hours as one of Pine Grove's few police officers. The McKinnon women were fixtures in the community, known for their resilience after Ruby's father died in a logging accident when she was 10. Ruby's best friend Macy Chen often said that Ruby's laugh could thaw the Vermont winter. It was a deep, uninhibited sound that echoed through the high school hallways and made others smile involuntarily. Even the teachers couldn't help grinning when they heard it, though they tried to maintain stern faces when she and her teammates got too rowdy in the cafeteria. Liam Foster was Ruby's opposite in almost every way. The middle child of Pine Grove's most prominent musical family, he was tall and lean, with perpetually ink-stained fingers from composing music. His mother, Dr. Catherine Foster, taught at the prestigious Green Mountain Conservatory while his father conducted the State Symphony. Both siblings were already at Juilliard, casting long shadows over Liam's own musical aspirations. At 18, Liam was a gifted pianist whose original compositions showed remarkable depth, but his severe performance anxiety kept him from playing publicly. He ran cross-country not out of passion, but as an escape, logging miles through Pine Grove's forests when his thoughts became too loud. His teachers described him as brilliant, but withdrawn, the kind of student who always knew the answer, but rarely raised his hand. The Foster family lived in a sprawling Victorian on Maple Street, its rooms filled with music at all hours. Liam's piano could often be heard late into the night, his melodies drifting across town like ghost stories. He spent most of his time in the school's music room during lunch breaks, preferring the company of his compositions to the chaos of the cafeteria. The paths of these two seniors, one bathed in spotlight, the other hiding in shadows, should never have crossed. But Pine Grove was the kind of town where everyone's stories eventually intertwined, like the roots of the ancient pines that gave the town its name. Their story began at the annual Maple Festival in December 2021. The Pine Grove Community Center had stood at the heart of town since 1902, its brick walls weathered by countless Vermont winters. On December 12, 2021, strings of white lights transformed the austere building into something magical, while the sweet scent of maple syrup drifted from vendor stalls lining the snow-dusted square. Inside the center's auditorium, Liam Foster sat at the grand piano, his fingers hovering over the keys. The annual fundraiser talent show always drew a full house, but tonight felt different. Every seat was filled with familiar faces, teachers, neighbors, family, friends, all waiting for the Foster prodigy to perform. His mother, Dr. Catherine Foster, watched from the front row, her perfect posture a reminder of the legacy he carried. At that exact moment, Ruby McKinnon slipped through the back doors, still in her navy blue Pine Grove Panthers warm-ups. Her team had just won their 4th straight game of the season, 68-42 against their biggest rivals. Instead of celebrating with her teammates, she'd rushed to support her sister Emma's dance performance, scheduled for later in the show. The wooden floorboards creaked under her basketball shoes as she found a spot along the back wall. The auditorium fell silent. Liam closed his eyes, took a shaky breath, and began to play. The piece started softly, like snow falling in the forest, then built into something raw and powerful. Ruby found herself holding her breath. This wasn't the typical classical music the Foster family was known for. This was something entirely new. The melody spoke of loneliness, of searching, of hope. When the final note faded into silence, Ruby was the first to stand, her applause breaking the spell and triggering a wave of recognition from the crowd. Dr. Foster's tight smile told everyone who understood such things that Liam's original composition had deviated too far from the classical piece he was supposed to play. But Ruby didn't notice this. She only saw how the boy at the piano seemed to fold into himself as people crowded around him afterward, his tall frame becoming smaller with each handshake and compliment. Later, as families spilled out into the square to watch the annual tree lighting, Ruby found Liam sitting alone on the community center's steps, a paper cup of maple cider cooling beside him. She almost walked past, her thoughts already turning to tomorrow's practice, but something made her stop. "That piece," she said, causing him to look up. "What's it called?" Liam's fingers tapped against his cup, playing phantom keys. "It doesn't have a name yet. It's not really finished." "Sounded finished to me." Ruby sat down beside him, the cold of the stone steps seeping through her warm-ups. "And it sounded like it should be called Winter's Turning." He looked at her then, really looked at her, surprise flickering across his features. The same girl whose picture was in the local paper every other week for breaking basketball records was sitting here, naming his music like she could see inside his head. "Winter's Turning," he repeated softly. "Why that name?" "Because it reminded me of that moment when winter starts to change," Ruby explained, watching her breath cloud in the December air. "When you can feel spring coming, but it's not quite there yet. That's what your music felt like. Something changing. Something about to happen." Above them, the festival lights twinkled against the darkening sky. Inside the community center, Emma's dance group was preparing to perform. But for the next 2 hours, Ruby and Liam sat on those cold steps, talking about music and basketball, dreams and fears, their words mixing with the steam from fresh cups of cider that Noah Reynolds, owner of the Maple Spoon, brought out to them with a knowing smile. Neither of them could have known that exactly 8 months later, those same steps would be cordoned off with police tape, and Noah Reynolds would be giving a statement about the tragedy he witnessed behind his diner. The weeks following the Maple Festival transformed Pine Grove High School's social landscape. Students who'd spent years watching Ruby McKinnon dominate the basketball court now saw her slipping into the music room during lunch periods, bringing coffee and sandwiches to the quiet boy at the piano. Liam Foster, who'd never eaten in the cafeteria, started appearing at a corner table with Ruby and her teammates, his composition notebook always open beside him. By January 2022, their unlikely romance became Pine Grove's favorite topic of conversation. Mothers discussed it over coffee at the Maple Spoon, teachers smiled when they passed the couple in the halls, and even Dr. Foster's criticism of Liam's compositions softened when Ruby started attending his practice sessions. On the court, Ruby played with a new kind of fire. The night after their first kiss, a shy, gentle moment behind the gym after her practice, she scored 35 points against their biggest rivals. In the stands, Liam recorded every squeak of her shoes against the hardwood, every swish of the net, every cheer from the crowd. That weekend, he transformed those sounds into a piece he called Victory Dance. When he played it for her team after their next win, even Coach Martinez wiped away tears. February brought record snowfall to Pine Grove. The town disappeared under thick white blankets, streets narrowing between towering snowbanks. On weekends, Ruby and Liam wandered through the silent woods behind his house, their footprints the only marks in the pristine snow. He told her about the music in his head, melodies that wouldn't let him sleep. She talked about the pressure of being everyone's golden girl, the weight of carrying her team's dreams alongside her own. "Sometimes I wish I could disappear into the music like you do," Ruby confessed one afternoon, watching him practice in the empty auditorium. "Just fade away from all the expectations." Liam's fingers stilled on the keys. "You could never fade away," he said, his voice intense. "You're like sunlight. The world would notice if you disappeared." For Valentine's Day, Liam gave Ruby a silver charm bracelet. Each charm represented a piece he'd written for her: a basketball for Victory Dance, a snowflake for Winter's Turning, a tiny bird for the melody he composed after watching her laugh with Emma at Sunday breakfast in the Maple Spoon. "So you'll always have my music with you," he explained, fastening it around her wrist. The charms chimed softly, like distant piano notes. Ruby wore it everywhere, during games, at practice, to school. The delicate tinkling became a familiar soundtrack in the hallways, as much a part of her as her infectious laugh or her basketball jersey. But even then, there were moments, brief flickers that most people missed. The way Liam's hands would tighten on his composition book when Ruby was surrounded by admirers after a game. How his smile would fade when college scouts pulled her aside for conversations about her future at Duke. The nights he spent rewriting entire sections of music because they weren't perfect enough for her. Officer McKinnon noticed these things with a mother's instinct. She saw how Liam waited by Ruby's locker every morning, how he appeared at the house on weekends before Ruby was awake, composition book in hand. She recognized something in his devotion that made her uneasy, a hunger that went beyond teenage love. "He's intense," she mentioned to Ruby one evening in early March as they cleaned up after dinner. "That's not always a good thing, sweetheart." Ruby laughed, the charms on her bracelet singing as she dried dishes. "He's an artist, Mom. They're supposed to be intense." But as winter began to thaw into spring, that intensity would begin to cast longer shadows. The melody of their love story was about to shift from a sweet duet into something darker, something that would eventually echo through Pine Grove like a scream in the night. March arrived in Pine Grove like a whisper, bringing with it the hollow sound of melting snow dripping from eaves and the first hint of spring in the air. But for Ruby McKinnon, the changing season brought something else. The weight of decisions and dreams that would soon pull her life in new directions. The college acceptance letters began arriving like falling dominoes. Ruby's came first, a thick envelope from Duke University that her mother filmed her opening at their kitchen table. Full scholarship, just as they'd hoped. The video of Ruby's ecstatic celebration went viral in Pine Grove's small social media circles, her joy infectious as she hugged her mother and Emma. Liam watched the video 17 times that night. His own letter arrived a week later, thin and unassuming, from the Vermont Conservatory of Music. Local, affordable, safe. When Dr. Foster saw it sitting unopened on the kitchen counter, her disappointment filled the room like smoke. "Juilliard's letter should be coming," she said, but they both knew it wouldn't. The following Monday, Ruby walked into the music room at lunch to find Liam hunched over the piano, playing something she'd never heard before. The melody was chaotic, discordant, nothing like the beautiful pieces he usually composed for her. His fingers struck the keys with such force she worried they might break. "I couldn't sleep," he said without turning around. "I kept thinking about you at Duke, about all those people who will get to see you every day, about the guys on the basketball team who will practice with you, study with you, be there when I can't." Ruby set her lunch bag down slowly. "Liam, that's still months away." 212 days, he corrected, finally looking at her. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. "I counted." That afternoon, Ruby's teammate Macy found her in the gym, shooting free throws long after practice had ended. The rhythmic bounce of the ball echoed off empty bleachers. "Everything okay?" Macy asked, catching a rebound. "You seemed distracted during practice." Ruby's next shot bounced off the rim. "Liam's just having a hard time with the Duke thing." "The Duke thing?" Macy raised an eyebrow. "You mean your future? Your dream?" The ball bounced between them, its echo fading to silence. By April, changes in Liam's behavior became impossible to ignore. He started showing up at Ruby's morning practices, sitting in the bleachers with his composition book. He appeared between every class, walking her to her next lesson even when his own class was in the opposite direction. His texts, once sweet daily messages, became constant. 7:15 a.m. Good morning. Missing you already. 7:30 a.m. Are you at practice yet? How's practice going? Who are you talking to after practice? Why aren't you answering? Ruby started leaving her phone in her locker during practice. The constant vibration of incoming messages made her teammates exchange worried glances. May and Pine Grove brought senior prom, graduation preparations, and a tension in the air as thick as summer storm clouds. The charm bracelet Liam had given Ruby now lived permanently in her bedroom drawer, its musical chimes silenced. Its absence on her wrist spoke louder than words. During the state championship game, Liam's behavior reached a new level that couldn't be ignored. Ruby was playing the game of her life, her final high school performance in front of Duke's head coach. With 2 minutes left in the fourth quarter, she was just 3 points shy of breaking the state's scoring record. That's when she saw him. Liam stood at the gym entrance, his composition book clutched so tightly his knuckles were white. He hadn't moved or sat down since the game began. His eyes followed her every movement with an intensity that made her miss a crucial free throw. When she glanced at him again, he was writing frantically in his book, crossing out entire pages with violent strokes. After Pine Grove won the championship, Ruby's teammates lifted her onto their shoulders. The crowd erupted, blue and white confetti raining down. Through the chaos, she saw Liam turning away, heading for the exit. Later that night, he sent her the piece he'd composed during the game. He called it Betrayal in B minor. "The music shows who you've become," his text read, "how you've changed. You used to play for love of the game, now you're just performing for them." Ruby didn't sleep that night. She sat in her window seat, reading and rereading his messages, watching the composition book video he'd sent where he played the new piece. The melody was jagged, accusatory, nothing like the beautiful songs he'd once written for her. It made her think of glass breaking. 3 days later, Ruby walked into the Maple Spoon diner with Macy, only to find Liam already there. He sat in what had become their usual booth, though they hadn't planned to meet. A fresh cup of her favorite hot chocolate with extra whipped cream and cinnamon, just how she liked it, waited on her side of the table. "I knew you'd come here," he said, smiling. "You always get hot chocolate after Thursday practice." Macy gripped Ruby's arm. "That's not normal, Ruby. That's not okay." For the first time, Ruby didn't argue. The following week, Ruby's mother caught Liam parked outside their house at midnight, his car dark, the glow of his phone illuminating his face as he watched Ruby's bedroom window. When Officer McKinnon confronted him, he claimed he was just making sure Ruby was safe. "Safe from what?" Diana demanded. "From everyone who's trying to change her," he replied, his voice eerily calm. "From everyone who's trying to take her away." The next morning, Diana showed Ruby the security camera footage from their driveway. It revealed Liam's car had been there 4 nights that week. "This ends now," Diana said, her police training evident in her tone, "or I end it officially." On May 15th, exactly 3 months before the tragedy that would shock Pine Grove, Ruby asked Liam to meet her at their spot, the community center steps where they'd first talked about his music. She'd rehearsed what she would say, practiced with Macy, prepared herself for his reaction. What she hadn't prepared for was his silence. "I can't do this anymore," Ruby said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "The constant watching, the accusations, the showing up everywhere. It's not love, Liam. It's control." He didn't speak, didn't move, just stared at her with an expression she'd never seen before. "You need help," she continued softly. "And I need space, real space, not just physical distance, but space to become someone else," he interrupted, his voice hollow. "Space to forget me, space to let them change you into their perfect basketball machine. That's not fair." "No," he agreed, standing slowly. "None of this is fair. I gave you everything, my music, my soul, my entire world, and you're throwing it away for what, a game?" "It's not about the game," Ruby said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "It's about who I am, who I want to become. And this, us, it's becoming something dangerous." The last word hung in the air between them. Liam's face transformed, a mask of calm cracking to reveal something that made Ruby take an involuntary step back. "Dangerous," he repeated, like he was tasting the word. "You think I'm dangerous because I love you too much? Because I see through all of them and their plans for you? Because I'm the only one who knows the real you?" "No, Liam, you don't know me at all anymore. Maybe you never did." She turned to leave then, her steps quick and purposeful. Behind her, Liam's voice carried across the evening air, soft but clear. "You're wrong, Ruby McKinnon. I'm the only one who knows you, the only one who ever will. Neither of them knew then that these words would be replayed 3 months later in a Pine Grove courtroom as evidence of premeditation. The first week after the breakup, silence fell over Pine Grove like a heavy snow. Liam stopped attending classes. The music room, usually alive with his melodies during lunch periods, stayed dark and quiet. Ruby found herself holding her breath every time she turned a corner, but he was nowhere to be seen. Then the messages started. They came at all hours, flooding Ruby's phone with a symphony of pain and accusation. 2:14 a.m. I rewrote Winter's Turning. It's about decay now, about how beautiful things rot. You're playing tomorrow's game for the Duke Scout. I know because I called the school pretending to be your uncle. They tell me everything about you. I saw your light on. Are you thinking about me, or are you texting someone else? Ruby blocked his number. The next day, she found a 10-page handwritten letter in her locker, musical notes scattered between the words like tears on a page. The day after that, another letter appeared, this time slipped into her gym bag during practice. He had to have been in the locker room, Macy said, her voice shaking as she read the letter. Ruby, this isn't just creepy anymore. It's stalking. Officer McKinnon documented everything, starting a file she prayed she'd never have to use officially. She installed extra security cameras around their house, made sure Emma knew never to open the door without checking who was there, and insisted on driving Ruby to and from practice. But Liam found ways around these precautions. On June 3rd, Ruby walked out of the gym after practice to find her car covered in sheet music, dozens of pages of original compositions taped to every window and door. The pieces had titles like Betrayal Symphony and The Death of Trust. Some of the notes were written in red ink that looked disturbingly like blood. The next week, during Ruby's graduation speech as class valedictorian, a piano could be heard playing softly from the music room. The melody was Victory Dance, the piece Liam had written for her after their first kiss. But now it was distorted, minor keys turning the once beautiful song into something that made people shift uncomfortably in their seats. Ruby's mother found Liam in the music room afterward, but he claimed he was just practicing for his own graduation performance. The fact that he'd stopped attending classes weeks ago, that he wouldn't be graduating with the class, seemed irrelevant to him. By early July, Ruby had stopped going to the Maple Spoon, stopped running her usual routes through town, stopped doing anything that followed a predictable pattern. But Pine Grove was too small a town to truly hide. One night, she was babysitting Emma while their mother worked a late shift. At midnight, Emma's scream brought Ruby running to her sister's room. There, standing in the glow of the security lights, was Liam, staring up at Emma's window from the backyard. By the time Officer McKinnon arrived home, he was gone, but he'd left something behind. On the back porch lay Ruby's charm bracelet, which had been locked in her drawer for months. Each charm had been crushed and twisted, the silver links stained with what looked like tears. The next day, Ruby's mother took her to the courthouse to file a restraining order. As they pulled into the parking lot, Ruby's phone lit up with a message from an unknown number. You can't restrain music, Ruby. You can't silence a symphony once it's begun. Our finale is still coming. That night, July 15th, exactly 1 month before the tragedy that would change Pine Grove forever, Liam's parents found him unconscious in his room, an empty bottle of sleeping pills on his piano. The note beside him read simply, "The music dies when she's not listening." He survived, barely. The hospital placed him on a psychiatric hold, and for 2 weeks, Ruby felt like she could breathe again. But Pine Grove General wasn't equipped for long-term mental health care. When Liam was released on August 1st, his parents promised he was better, that the medications were working, that he understood now. They didn't know he was already composing his final piece, a cruel symphony that would end behind the Maple Spoon 2 weeks later, written not in musical notes, but in blood and betrayal. The morning of August 15th dawned crisp and clear in Pine Grove, the kind of late summer day that hinted at autumn's approach. Ruby McKinnon sat in her usual booth at the Maple Spoon with Macy Chen, their steaming cups of hot chocolate creating ghostly shapes in the morning air. In 2 weeks, they would be leaving for Duke together. Macy for pre-med, Ruby for basketball. Their conversation buzzed with plans for dorm decorations and freshman orientation. Neither noticed the shadow that passed by the diner's window or the figure that slipped into the alley beside the building. At 9:47 a.m., Ruby's phone vibrated with a text from an unknown number. "Come outside. One last song to share." Ruby's hands trembled as she showed Macy the message. "I should tell my mom." "I'll call her," Macy said, already reaching for her phone. "Don't go out there." But Ruby was already standing, her jaw set with determination. "No, this needs to end. Now." She walked toward the back door of the diner, the same door she'd used hundreds of times during breaks from basketball practice. Through the window, she could see Noah Reynolds wiping down the counter, his back turned. The moment Ruby stepped into the alley, she knew she'd made a mistake. Liam stood there, the morning sun catching the blade in his hand. He looked nothing like the boy who had once played Winter's Turning on the community center steps. His eyes were wild, unfocused, his clothes dirty and wrinkled, as if he'd been wearing them for days. "You came," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I knew you would. You always understood the music." Ruby backed away slowly, her basketball shoes crunching on the gravel. "Liam, whatever you're thinking, I'm thinking about symmetry," he cut her off, moving closer. "About how stories should end where they began. We began with music. We should end with it too." He reached into his pocket with his free hand, pulling out a crumpled sheet of paper covered in musical notation. "I wrote our finale last night. Would you like to hear it?" Inside the diner, Noah Reynolds finally turned around. Through the window, he saw Ruby pressed against the brick wall, saw the sunlight glinting off the hunting knife in Liam's hand. He reached for the phone to call 911, then changed his mind. There wasn't time. "The thing about music," Liam continued, now close enough that Ruby could smell the sour scent of unwashed clothes, "is that it has to resolve. Every piece needs its final chord." "This isn't resolution," Ruby said, her voice steadier than she felt. "This is madness, Liam." The words seemed to trigger something in him. His face contorted, and the hand holding the knife began to shake. "Madness? Was it madness when I wrote you symphonies? When I gave you my soul in musical notes? When I saw what all these people were doing to you, trying to change you, trying to take you away?" The back door of the Maple Spoon burst open with a bang that echoed through the alley. Noah Reynolds stood there, his dish towel still clutched in one hand. "Liam! Step back!" Everything happened at once. Liam lunged forward, the knife arcing through the morning air. Ruby twisted away, but not fast enough. The blade caught her side, then her arm as she tried to protect herself. Her scream shattered the quiet morning like breaking glass. Noah tackled Liam from behind, sending them both sprawling onto the pavement of the alley. The knife skittered across the gravel, leaving tiny scratches that gleamed in the morning sun. Ruby slumped against the brick wall, her blood bright against the floor. Inside the diner, Macy was screaming into her phone, giving the dispatcher details through her tears. In the distance, sirens began to wail. Officer McKinnon responding to her worst nightmare. The struggle on the gravel was brief but violent. Liam fought like a composer possessed, his fingers still stained with ink from writing his finale, clawing at Noah's face. But the older man had the advantage of size and desperation. He pinned Liam down just as the first police car skidded into the alley. The last thing Ruby saw before losing consciousness was her mother's face, lined with terror and love swimming above her. Somewhere in the distance, Liam was screaming. Not words, but musical notes, singing a tuneless song that would haunt Pine Grove's dreams for years to come. The sound of approaching ambulance sirens mixed with his voice, creating a discordant symphony that finally faded to silence as Ruby's world went dark. The golden girl of Pine Grove lay in the blood-stained snow, while the boy who had once written her love songs in musical notes was led away in handcuffs, his final composition scattered across the gravel like fallen leaves. The story that began with a melody on the community center steps had reached its crushing crescendo behind the Maple Spoon, leaving a town to wonder how love could turn so quickly to obsession and music to madness. Ruby McKinnon spent 2 weeks in Burlington Memorial Hospital, healing from 3 stab wounds that nearly ended her basketball career. The doctors called her survival miraculous. The blade had missed her vital organs by millimeters. During her recovery, cards and letters poured in from across Vermont, many from young athletes and musicians who saw in her story a warning about love's darker shadows. Liam Foster was charged with attempted murder and stalking. His trial lasted 3 weeks. The Pine Grove courthouse packed each day with townspeople who struggled to reconcile the quiet pianist they'd known with the obsessed young man described in testimony. Dr. Foster took a leave of absence from the conservatory, her perfect posture finally breaking as she listened to the playback of Liam's final, disturbing compositions. The jury took only 4 hours to reach their verdict. Liam was sentenced to 15 years in the Vermont State Correctional Facility with mandatory psychiatric treatment. His final statement to the court was delivered in musical terms. Some symphonies were never meant to end quietly. Pine Grove changed in the wake of the tragedy. The Maple Spoon added security cameras to its back alley, and the high school instituted mandatory counseling sessions about healthy relationships. The music room remained locked for months, as if the town feared Liam's darkness might somehow linger in the keys of the piano he'd played. Ruby started at Duke 1 semester late, in January 2023. Her first game back on the court, she scored 20 points, her mother and sister cheering from the stands. The only remnant of that bloody morning was a thin scar on her arm, visible when she raised her hands to shoot. Noah Reynolds received a civilian commendation from the Pine Grove Police Department. He hung the certificate in the Maple Spoon next to Ruby's last championship photo, though he moved it away from the wall where Liam's piano recital poster had once hung. On a warm evening in August 2023, exactly 1 year after the attack, Ruby stood before a group of young athletes at the Pine Grove summer basketball camp. The community center's gymnasium was packed, not just with players, but with parents, teachers, and townsfolk who'd lived through her story. "Love shouldn't hurt," she began, her voice strong and clear. "It shouldn't control, it shouldn't isolate. Real love gives you wings, it doesn't clip them." She told them about the warning signs she'd missed, the constant monitoring, the isolation from friends, the way Liam had turned her achievements into betrayals. She spoke about the difference between passion and obsession, between devotion and possession. "I used to think that intensity meant depth," she said, unconsciously touching the scar on her arm. "That someone loving you so much they'd write symphonies about you meant you were special. But real love is quiet sometimes. It's secure enough to let you grow, to let you be yourself." As she spoke, summer light filtered through the high windows, casting long shadows across the basketball court. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed, a clear, simple melody that floated through the evening air. "My story isn't just about dating violence or stalking," Ruby concluded. "It's about recognizing our own worth, about understanding that true love, whether it's for a person, a sport, or an art, should never require us to become smaller, to dim our light, to stop growing." She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. "We all have dreams. Mine was basketball. Liam's was music. But when dreams become chains, when love becomes a cage, that's when we need to recognize the difference between a love song and a siren's call." After the speech, as people filed out into the warm summer evening, Officer Diana McKinnon hugged her daughter close. Emma, now 13 and nearly as tall as Ruby, joined them, wearing her sister's old Pine Grove Panthers practice jersey. Above them, the first stars were appearing in the Vermont sky. From the Maple Spoon came the sounds of dishes clinking, of conversations and laughter, of life continuing its steady rhythm. Ruby looked up at those stars, thinking about how far she'd come, about the games ahead at Duke, about the future stretching before her like an open road. The story that began with a melody had ended with a lesson, one that would echo through Pine Grove for generations to come. In the end, it wasn't a story about music or basketball or even young love. It was a story about recognizing one's own worth, about the courage to say no, about the strength to keep reaching for the stars, even when someone tries to pull you back to earth. Ruby McKinnon had learned that lesson the hard way. Now, standing tall beneath the Vermont stars, she was ready to help others learn it too. Not through fear, but through hope. Not through pain, but through healing. Not through a shattered dream, but through a future full of possibilities, each one shining as bright as the stars above Pine Grove.